Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new track review video where I get to talk about several recently released songs that I happened to hear and wanted to share my thoughts on. I know I didn't get to do one of these videos last week, that's just I had a lot of other things going on between other videos I was working on for the channel and just other stuff in my personal life, so instead I'm kind of putting the stuff I would have done last week, which wasn't much, and this week together into one video. So yeah, with that said, let's get started with talking about some of these new tracks that I wanted to share my opinions on here today. The first one I want to talk about is this new Baroness track, Seasons. Now, Baroness, of course, have been teasing this new album of theirs. The first single they dropped from this thing a couple of weeks ago was one of my favorite tracks of that track review segment I did where I reviewed it, and it's one of my favorite songs of the year currently. Just a really big, massive, epic, awesome track from Baroness that got me really hyped up to hear this new album of theirs. Coming into this second single from this new album, though, I am a lot cooler on this track than I was that first single that we got a few weeks ago. I still think this is a good song, but I don't think it's as great a track as the last one that we got. Overall, this track just feels kind of okay, a little bit forgettable, in the grand scheme of things, I guess. Maybe hearing it in the context of the album it's a part of will make it a bit more interesting. But overall, there's very little to this track that really jumps out at me and excites me. All the performances on this thing are pretty solid through and through, and there is a pretty nice guitar solo that comes in later on in this track that I did really enjoy. However, aside from that, there's not much to this song, really. There's not really any cool song structures, there's no grand scale to it or anything. There's no catchy hook. There's nothing that's really heavy or just crazy experimental or anything. It's just a really safe song from Baroness, which kind of disappointed me, but at the same time, it's not a terrible track either. Like I said, it's still passable. So I'm hoping that more of this album we'll be getting later this year is like the first single we got as opposed to the second one, because this one was just okay in my opinion. Not great, but fine, I guess. Moving on, in the next couple of tracks I'm going to be talking about are a couple new songs from Nails. Overall, I have to say that these two songs are pretty solid. The first of these two songs, I Don't Want to Know You, is a more typical Nails track. It's very aggressive, very in your face, very heavy, dense, disgusting. All of the things I tend to like in a Nails song pop up here on this track. And overall, it's just the band doing what they do pretty well, I guess. I wouldn't say that this song is necessarily a standout in their discography. I wouldn't say it's one of their best tracks that falls under this style of music, but it's still a pretty good one. And if you're a fan of this group, I think this first track will be, at the very least, somewhat entertaining to you, or at the very least it was for me. The next track that Nails drop is Endless Resistance, featuring Max Cavalera, here also on the vocals. Overall, this track is a bit different from your typical Nails song. It's a bit more conventional in structure, I guess. It's not a really short, in-your-face type song. I mean, it still is very in-your-face, but the song runs a bit longer than your typical Nails track, and the whole structure to it is a bit more normal, I guess. Also, this track is a bit groovier than your typical Nails song as well. I guess that makes sense given that Max Cavalera has played in some pretty big name groove metal bands over the years. So this whole collaboration here, I guess, makes some sense when you look at it. And overall, it's a pretty solid track as well. I love the very dense and heavy atmosphere that this track has going for it. The very groovy sound that this track has. It's different for Nails to some extent in the regard that it's not as just fast and furious and just in your face, but at the same time, this track still has a very aggressive and dangerous tone to it that I think fits in really nicely with the rest of this band's discography. So overall, I think this was a pretty solid collaboration, and overall, just a pretty enjoyable track. These couple of Nails songs are ones that you should definitely check out if you're a fan of the band, or you're just looking for some good, heavy, aggressive metal music that's recently been released. These two tracks will definitely satisfy that itch of yours. Moving on, the next track that we're going to be talking about is the newest track from Tame Impala, Borderline. This is the second single from the upcoming album from this music project. The first single from this project, as I said in my initial track review of it, was one that I thought was decent. I liked the vibe of the overall track. However, it didn't really stand out to me all that much, and I didn't really anticipate it sticking with me all that much in the upcoming weeks. And a few weeks later, I can say that I was pretty right in my initial claim, because that track really has not stuck with me since, despite still being a pretty pleasant listen whenever you put the song on. This second track here, though, it carries some of these same qualities that were on that first single. It does have a very similar vibe to it, and it is a vibe that I do think is pretty solid and enjoyable overall. However, I think that this track has a lot more to it that I could see myself coming back to. Most notably, this track has a bit more of a catchier hook to it that just makes the track a bit more infectious, and it makes me want to return to the track more. Like I said, I do really like the vibe, the kind of synth disco-esque sound that these couple of singles have had. However, I think this single just has a bit more to it in terms of substance. It does just feel like this extended, pleasant sounding vibe. You get some of that here on this track, but I feel like this one's a bit more well structured. There's a bit more substance to it. It's just a lot more enjoyable overall, I guess, and a bit more memorable. I don't think it's necessarily one of this group's best songs or anything, or one of the best songs of the year or anything like that. It's just a pretty solid pop song overall. So I guess if that's what you're looking for, this track will satisfy, I guess. Overall, pretty solid track. Not a one that I would say is great necessarily, but still pretty good. Moving on, the next track I'm going to be talking about is this new song from Morello, also featuring Gary Clark Jr. and, excuse me if I mispronounce this, but Gramatik. Not familiar with that artist, might be mispronouncing that, and I apologize if that's the case. This track appears to be some kind of leftover or track recorded during the sessions, or it's related to in some way Tom Morello's last studio album, The Atlas Underground, that came out last year. Or at least that's what I'm guessing based on the artwork for this track is similar to that of that last album. So I'm guessing this came from something related to that album. And if you saw my review of that album, you know I did not like that album at all. It was my least favorite album of last year. Really terrible mixture of rock, hip-hop, EDM music as well, like particularly dubstep, and just like this really awful mixture. Lots of guest performances on that thing that were just pretty subpar and boring or just terrible as well. Just a pretty terrible project all around. So I was not looking forward to hearing any track that was related to this project in any way, shape, or form. But I decided to give this song a chance just because, you know, why not? Maybe this will be a good song at the end of the day. Maybe it will be enjoyable. And it's not enjoyable, but this track almost tricked me a little bit, because the first half or so of this song is probably better than most of what was on the Atlas Underground. Like, it's still not very good, but it's better. Like, it's just really boring, like, rock music, I guess. Tom Morello's riffs on this thing are pretty generic, which was a big problem I had with that last album, and it still carries over here onto this track as well. The vocal performance is just really plain and uninteresting as well. The whole first half or so of this song is just pretty uninteresting overall. I mean, but it's still better than most of the Atlas Underground, but it's still, you know, not a very good sound, I guess. But, you know, I was thinking to myself, maybe this was a step in the right direction to some extent. And then the second half of the song kicks in with the EDM aspect of the track, and I was just instantly reminded about how bad the Atlas Underground was, because it seems like on that album and on this song, Tom Morello's just like completely forgotten how to write interesting tracks. So instead of just writing compelling songs, he just kind of throws a bunch of features and random sounds at you in hopes that the track comes across as interesting. Because this EDM switch up in the middle of the song did not need to happen. It does not sound good. It sounds really tacky. It sounds like it's out of like the earlier parts of this decade, but not in a good way either. Once again, this mixture of like dubstep and rock that Tom Morello was going for does not work very nicely. It just does not sound good at all. This is a pretty terrible song. Do not recommend you check it out or that album. But yeah, just my own personal opinion with this one. Moving on, the next track we're going to be talking about is this new Charlemagne's Menagerie track. Charlemagne Menagerie, better known as Viral Rack here on YouTube, fellow music reviewer, YouTuber. Check his stuff out if you haven't done so already. this cover that he recently released of the They Might Be Giants track, Older, is one that is pretty solid in my opinion. Overall, it's a pretty standard cover, I'd say, though there is enough experimentation and different things done on this track to make it stand out. Yeah, he's definitely able to pull in the kind of electronic, experimental aspect of Charlemagne's Menagerie into this cover in a really nice and interesting way, while still keeping what made the original track interesting in its own right as well. Overall, it's just a very nice marriage between the more typical Charlemagne's Menagerie sound and the sound of the original track, which is, tends to be what I look for in a good cover song. So, yeah, this one was a pretty solid cover overall. Make sure you give it a listen. And finally, the last track we're going to be talking about here today is the new Cal Chuchesta track, Best Teef, which also features Anthony Fantano of the Needle Drop on this track. This track being a diss track aimed at Anderson.Paak, who recently has gotten into a little feud with Fantano over the Best Teef title, and Cal saw it fit to defend Anthony, his best friend and roommate. So he released a diss track aimed at Anderson.Paak, and he released it the same day as Ventura dropped as well, which was a pretty savage move on Cal's part. But overall, this is definitely one of the more cold-blooded diss tracks I've heard in a while. Like, Anderson.Paak is lucky that Ventura is as good as it is, because if not, his career would have been over with this track here. Cal is essentially coming here on this track, defending Anthony's honor, dropping some really hot bars about how Anderson.Paak's teeth are trash compared to Anthony's, defending his roommate's honor, essentially. And he just goes in way more than he has to. And then towards the back half of the track, Anthony himself pops up on the track to deliver another cold-blooded verse that really closes out the track in a very nice way. Overall, just another shining example of how Cal is truly the best rapper out there in the game right now. It just seems like every track that he touches turns to gold to some extent. So yeah, overall, this track, it's a Best Teef out of 10 in my opinion. And with that said, that concludes today's track review catch-up video. This is just my own personal opinion, so if you happen to disagree with any of my thoughts on any of these tracks, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own opinions in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like more track reviews, album reviews, lists, countdown lists in particular, things like that. So if you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.